Hi, my name's Horton and I'm an engineer for our 3D documentation team here at FARO UK. During this tutorial I'd like to show you the new features of FARO Scene 6. We will now take a look at all the new features of Scene 6. The first thing you may notice is that we have a new icon. So if I double click on that, you'll see now how quick Scene 6 is to load up. I'm actually running a trial version at the moment, so I'm just going to click OK to that, and then you'll notice that we have a completely new interface in the background which we'll go through step by step. But also, one of the first new features is that if you are connected to the internet and a newer version of Scene is available, be it an interim patch, then the system will go off to the Scene server, check for those new versions and ask you whether you want to update your license. So it means there should always be an option to work on the latest version of Scene, either the latest patch version or the latest version if you have an active maintenance contract. I'm just going to click no to that. So first off, if we take a look through the interface, we've got two interfaces which will flip backwards and forwards between. This is the new interface. So along the top you can see a series of tabs. None of them are active at the moment because we haven't got a project open. Over on the right hand side we also have access to the apps. So if we click on the apps icon, we can start to load in our apps into the new interface. Just by clicking on here it will load in the app manager and you'd load apps in the normal way. We then have a series of settings. So in here, very similar to in the classic interface in Scene, we can set our language and our units. We can also set our project folder. So in here you can see that I have a Scene beta folder where I've just kept everything nice and clean for now. I've tried to keep my data for Scene 6 separate to my data for Scene 5.5. Also in here you can no longer copy and paste into this dialog box. In order to add multiple strings that are separated by a semicolon, you simply click on the select folder icon here and it will keep adding in folder locations. So if you've watched previous tutorials, I tend to work on my local hard drive, which is a solid state hard drive for processing all files. I will then archive those onto my D drive, which is a SATA drive. That could be your server, but I also want to see all those projects in my project selector. As we scroll down, we can enable a location for any log files that are created during the use of Scene, but we can also set our temporary data folder up. The key here is you need to have sufficient disk space in order to have a decent temp folder, but again we'll come onto this as we go through. If I then go onto the import option, we can choose what units we're going to use for importing data. We then go down to processing. I'll come on to processing very shortly, but what we can do now is when we process data, we can get the system to automatically register the data after processing. We then go onto registration. Now this new interface is pretty much aimed at doing top view and cloud to cloud registrations. If you're working in a traditional format with targets and maybe survey control, then we can switch back to the classic interface, which we'll go on to very shortly. So in here, when we're doing an automatic registration, instead of performing a two-step process of doing top view and then cloud to cloud, we can get the system now to do a top view and a cloud to cloud one after the other. We can choose whether we then want to do a cloud to cloud registration if we do a manual registration. Again, we'll cover that when we go a bit further. We can choose which sensors we want to use for every registration. We can also choose what our average subsampling is for cloud to cloud and for top view, as well as our reliability thresholds for top view. And down at the bottom we can choose various values for our new registration report. To edit these, we simply click in the dialog box, type in the new value, which could be here, could be 4mm, and over here we could have 8mm, and then just click the tick. The same thresholds apply for overlap and color coding. So very quickly in the registration report we get visual feedback of whether a registration is good or bad. And finally we go down to views. We have a new smart navigation mode which we'll go through. I can invert my mouse wheel and we can set our default movement speed. we can also have an acceleration factor built against our navigation speed by using the Shift key. We can choose whether we want super sampling on or off, which for sparse points or low resolution scans, super sampling might show more gappage in our scan data. And down at the bottom we can choose to have clear view, gap filling or no effect. Another new feature which you'll see on the screen very shortly is the ability to have an environmental map. For this particular example we're showing a cloudy sky. We've also got a sunset in there. All you need to do if you want to create your own is have a decent resolution image, and the resolution must be twice as wide as it is high. Or if you don't like the new environmental map, you can flip back to the colour gradient. So you remember that when I first started it came up with a 30-day license setting. Up at the top here, if I click on License Manager, if I have an active maintenance contract, then by clicking on the Update Licenses, the system will go off to the license server and should update your license. If at all you have any issues with this, please contact support@faroeurope.com or your local support centre. And also, if you want to switch back to the classic interface, I simply click this button here and it will flip back to a Scene 5 style interface. I'm going to leave it in this interface for now and we'll flip back a little bit later on. Now just one thing to note, if in any of these dialog boxes you modify anything and you can't remember what you changed, you can simply reset the view settings in any of the tabs. I'm going to go back to my main window now. At the top we can create a new project or we can open any previous projects. What we also have is this project transfer option. So now if I put my SD card into my machine, you get this message that we've always had asking us to transfer the data directly from an SD card. As you know, if you've got multiple projects on the SD card, it will bring them all across. Now what we have the option to do is if I click yes, it will then go and look at that SD card and it gives us here the list of all the projects on my SD card. If I only want to transfer this Scene 6 one down here, I simply untick each of the others and it will only transfer this Scene 6 project. In transferring it we can automatically get the data to process, which I'll cover very shortly. But it means now bringing the data into the system is a lot easier. If we cancel that, if at all you accidentally click no to that dialog and you want to transfer the project automatically, all you have to do is click on the project transfer icon, click on the select folder icon here, go and find your SD card, click OK, and then straight away your projects will come in. This could also be beneficial if you have multiple SD cards or multiple devices plugged into your machine. Again, I'm just going to click cancel on here. So first off, I'm going to create a new project and call it tutorial and click create. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that all the other icons along the top become active. It also tells us the path to where we're saving things. We can add a project location in here so we know exactly where it was. We can also come over here and change the image for our particular project. At the top we have the project history. We've done nothing yet, so there'll be no history in there. And we can also wipe the project history, or we can simply close the project. Down at the bottom we can add in a description, but you'll then see a series of steps that we need to follow. Before following any of those steps, we need to bring some scans into the system. So rather than use the SD card transfer option, I'm going to go to the Import tab, and over here it's telling us to drag and drop files to import. So I've already got some scans open on my other screen. I'm just going to pick 3 scans, drag and drop them into the window, and it will import those. So here we'll see the traditional folder structure over on the left hand side, and take note of this new icon. It looks like a broken circle. That is telling me that I have unprocessed scans. If I go back to my project tab now, at the bottom we have 2 red lights. First is the processing tab, and second is the registration tab. Now what I can do here is press on the process option. Now what this is going to do, in Scene 5.5 a workflow may have been to drag and drop the scans, to then go in and apply colour, to then go in and apply a scan point cloud. That would have been a 3-step operation. First is to drag and drop and save your scans. which then applies the default filters. The second will then go in and manually apply the colour to your scans. And thirdly, we go in and create a scan point cloud to improve the navigation and visualization within the system, i.e. we didn't need the scans loaded in order to do anything with them. Plus it means if the scans are not loaded, the RAM of the machine is not being full, so it gives C more power to perform operations. This now is a one-stage process. Your perception may be that it's a little slower, but in reality it's faster because it's doing everything in one hit. So it means that you can drag your scans in, press save, go off, do something else, and by the time you come back everything's happened, rather than having to sit there and wait for the system to do each step. And here you can also see it's giving us a percentage of what we've actually done. So that took no time at all to process 3 scans. So those 3 scans are now saved, the colour has been applied, and we've now got scan point clouds. So if I click OK to that, you'll see my image in the background. You'll see that the processing has been done. I can then flip over to the Explore tab, and straight away we'll see the scans on the screen. So if I set the center of rotation on those scans and then I rotate up, the next option you'll see is the environment map. So this is my cloudy sky. So I can zoom in and have a look at the scans, and you'll see that they're not registered because the scans are all over the place. Also in here you'll notice this circle appears on the screen. If I don't do anything, then the circle will disappear. This is our new smart navigation mode. So at the bottom here we have view modes. We're set to be smart navigation. We still have examine, fly, pan and walk. To the next we have perspective and orthographic. We can also fit the view as before. We can also look from the different predefined views. We can set our center of rotation on our scans, or we can use the last camera position icon to toggle back to the last camera position. But with the new smart navigation mode, you'll notice that my icon changes depending on whether I'm in, on the edge, or outside of this visualization wheel. So inside, we're in a fly mode. If I'm within this banding here, I'm in a roll mode, similar to how we used to go to the edge of the screen. And if I'm outside, I'm in examine mode. So it means from a navigation perspective, it's really cool to navigate around your point cloud whilst having some visual feedback on the screen to see where you are. If we go back to our project tab, which is our main screen, we can now see we've got a number of scans, the recording time of when we did it, and we've also got whenever we've done any modifications to those scans. The next tab we have is the registration option. Now I could click over here on the registration tab, or I can do it from here. If I click on registration, it takes me directly to that tab anyway. So it's adding intelligence as to where you've got to click next. We have an automatic registration option at the top. Over here we have a manual registration, which I'll cover very shortly. And then we have our registration report, which doesn't exist at the moment because I physically haven't done a registration. Also on the far right we have the options to add, disband or delete clusters. As mentioned, this main interface is primarily all about doing a top view and a cloud to cloud. You may remember in the settings up here, when I go to registration, the registration method is going to be an automatic top view and cloud to cloud. So if I go back, click on this perform automatic registration option here, click start automatic registration, the system will now go in, it will look at those 3 scans, it will load the necessary data that it needs to, it will first perform a top view registration, so it's looking at the scans from the top and looking for common vertical surfaces. When it's aligned those scans, it will then go straight ahead and perform a cloud to cloud registration, and as soon as it's done that, it will come back and tell us whether we've had a pass or fail. Again, the perception might be that it's a little slower. The reality is it's faster, because there's no human intervention with having to first go in and do a top view and then go in and do a cloud to cloud registration. And straight away you can see here that it's gone in and done the registration for us. So as before, we would do a visual representation and look at whether things are aligned, which they appear to be here. Over on the left hand side we're looking at the 3D view, or we can look at unique colour, which in effect is the correspondence view. Same as before, if we wanted to look at the correspondence view in orthographical perspective, we can do, or we can simply look from the top view down, zoom into an area, and then apply a clear view mode. So as we zoom in, that clear view mode becomes more transparent, and we can start to see the overlap between elements to see whether anything is misaligned. Or we can simply just fit the view, or we can flip back to 3D view and turn off unique colour. We can also apply clipping boxes here directly because we've automatically created a scan point cloud. Over on the right here, we can start to look at the report. So this is our new report system. In here, we're getting a mean point error of these 3 scans and a maximum point error. So here we've got a 2.44mm error, and we've got a minimum overlap of 66%. It's telling us down here what settings we used for cloud to cloud. And over on the right hand side, we have the new registration report. So as we float over any of these grey boxes, our grey boxes are our scans. So scan 1 is linked to scan 2 by a 1.8mm mean error, and is also linked to scan 3 by 2.9mm. Similarly, this one here, scan 2, is linked back to scan 1 by 1.8mm, and so on and so forth. Down at the bottom, we can also start to see which scans are linked to which and how many connections they have. So scan 3 only has 1 connection, and scan 1 has 2 connections. So here we can see it's linked to these 2 scans by which error and by which overlap. We can select and copy and paste all this data, and we can copy that into Excel. So with the data selected, if I just use Control C on my keyboard, go into Excel and do Control V to paste it in, here you'll see all the data has come in rows and columns, so we can then modify this to suit whatever we need to. And we've got our registration information here in a report which we could stylize with our own company logo and so on and so forth. So it's a nice easy way of getting the data out of Scene into a tabulated format. We go back into Scene now. If we're happy with the registration, then all we have to do is click on Yes, followed by Finish. If we're not happy with the registration, you click No, and then you can go in and start to create more clusters or start to do some manual registration. In this instance, I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to click Finish. The data there is then registered, so if I go to the Explore option, it opens me up instantly in 3D. I can then set my center of rotation on the building there and start to navigate in and around the building to see exactly what we've got. So there you can see 3 nicely registered scans. So you will have noticed a little bit earlier that when I'm in Explore mode, I then have a whole new series of icons along the top. What we've done is simplified these into groups. So here we have our annotation option for adding in external pictures or external links. We have our measure points, which if we click on the link below, we can measure between points or objects either on the screen or in the physical tree structure on the left hand side. We then have our polygon selector tools, below which we have our blue polygon selector and our blue brush selector. Bearing in mind that we're working on scan point clouds now, we're not working on FLS files. If we wanted to work in a planar view, then these other options will become available. Then we have our selection tools, which we had up on the top dialog bar in the classic Scene 5 interface. So we can do new selections, add to, subtract or intersect. We can save screenshots. We can create our viewpoints simply by clicking on Create or toggling Next or Previous. We can create clipping boxes automatically by 1 click or by 3 clicks to a surface. We can create virtual scans as before, and we can create our project point cloud, which I'll cover very shortly. At the top we also have one more tab, which is our export tab. So if I click on that, we can export a project. By exporting a project, we either export the ls.proj file or we export the recap file. Again, as before, if you right click on a scan, it will export that as a recap file. If you right click on a cluster, it will export that as a recap file. Also up here we have a new option to export unordered or ordered scans. In previous versions of Scene, we typically worked with our FLS files. The FLS files are in an ordered format because they are created in what we call a row and column database, which has order to it. Hence, on export, we can actually apply subsampling. So if I click on ordered, then in here we can apply as an E57 file ordered data by applying a subsample to reduce the point cloud size. Now, because we're primarily working on scan point clouds, if I choose unordered, that would be the same as export scan point cloud in scene 5. Again, there's not the option to order it. All we can do is turn off each scan in a separate file. If we now go back to the Explore mode, you'll notice that I've got various bits of noise in and around here. So to get rid of that noise, I use the polygon selector and I select the polygon. I start to trace around an area, double click to close, and you'll notice that that area is highlighted yellow. I can right click and do selection and do delete selected points, but now we have an option to invert that selection. So if you invert that selection, it will select everything outside of that area, or if I want to return back to that, I invert the selection again, and then to delete it, it's just a case of right clicking, doing select deleted points. So to make those changes permanent, all I need to do is a quick save, put a note in to say deleted points, and then click OK. This will now go in, it will open the FLS file, which you can see it doing over here. It will delete the points from that, and it will then reproduce the scan point cloud. So as soon as that's done, we get confirmation on the screen. I click OK, and I can move on and start to delete other points in and around this particular building. So those are the very basic principles. Create a new project, process the data, use the automatic method for registration, which does a top view and a cloud to cloud. Check the registration visually on the screen and also in the new report. Come in, use the polygon selection tools to select an area and delete it. Now what we'll do is look at the manual registration methods. So if I go back to the project tab, I'm going to close this project. We'll then create a new project and call it tutorial 2 and click create. I'll go to the import tab. I'll pick another 3 scans, drag those in, click OK. I can either then process from here by right clicking and going process scans, or I can go back to the project tab. I'm just going to click process on those there and let it do its thing. So that's now complete. While we're in this dialog box of the import, you'll notice that we can also import external objects, import images, or we can import any annotation data from WebShare Cloud had we shared this data to the cloud. If I toggle back to my project, you'll see that my processing has been done on these 3 scans, and I get my preview automatically generated from one of the scans. If I go to registration now, rather than perform an automatic registration, I'm going to perform a manual registration. If I click on the manual registration icon, so this is a little bit like the split correspondence view in C5.5 and the freestyle scan placement option under the freestyle menu. In here we can sort by name, by recording time, or we can sort by best match as to which the next available scan is in the list. We can start to use the find options in here for finding scans by name if we know which scans need to link to which one, or I can select scan 1 in the left and scan 2 in the right, and at the top we can start to mark targets. The system then tells us that we need to mark more identical targets in both scans because we don't have any at the moment. I can either mark points, mark planes, mark spheres, or mark checkerboards. Now this is very similar to the scan placement option for the freestyle. So here, because I've got some spheres, I'm going to use this sphere expand option to select on my spheres just by clicking on them. So I'm going to pick 3 spheres over here, and I think I've got another one over here on the cabinet that I'll pick, and then we'll go into here, we'll pick the same ones, again just clicking on the spheres. As soon as we've got more than 2, it comes up and tells us that we've got those and links the 2 together. So here it's rename the spheres. I can then click register and verify, and it will go through and register those 2 scans together based on those 3 locations. Once it's done that, it brings it up on the screen for a quick visual check. We can look at unique colour again, or we can say we're satisfied with the result of those 2 because they visually look correct, and go on to the next pair. Now we've done number 2, so we'll link number 2 with number 3 and do the same thing again. So we'll go in, we'll use the mark sphere option and mark some spheres. So in this scan here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make my picking a little bit easier. I'll mark the sphere over there, we'll pick this one over here, this one down here because we can see more than 50% of it, and this one here, and then we've already picked these ones here, so we'll register and verify again. When it's done, we're satisfied with the result, so I'll click finish, and then when it's done that, it then comes up and says the manual registration was completed successfully. So it's put those scans together roughly, and then do we want to start the optimization, which will then go through and it will do a cloud to cloud over the top of those registered scans. So exactly the same as we've worked with freestyle data, we give it 3 positional locations to locate each scan, and then we optimize that location with our cloud to cloud registration. Now that's done, we can see the 3 scans have been registered. We can look at the report for those scans, and here we've got a mean point error of 1 mil. It's telling us which scans are registered to which. If we're happy, we can click yes, click finish, go to the Explore tab, and then we've got our 3 scans nicely registered on the screen. So we can use a combination of both against clusters, or we can just do automatically everything as a top view and a cloud to cloud. What I would advise is if you are working with spheres more in the survey control way of working, then I would do that in the classic interface rather than in this new interface. To add to that as well, if you are doing very complex cloud to cloud registrations, in here in the settings, as we're modifying the cloud to cloud and the top view settings, these are being applied globally to every registration that you do. If you're used to using cloud to cloud, you'll notice that sometimes you need to tweak these settings based on individual clusters. To do that, again, I'd switch to the traditional user interface. So whilst I'm here, if I click on that icon, it will toggle this project back into the classic user interface. So here you can see everything looks very similar in the same location as it always was. Over on the left side now, you can see that we have got a scan point cloud denoted by the number 3. If we right click to do export, we now have ordered or unordered. So unordered is your scan point cloud, or ordered is your raw FLS files. In the new user interface, we also have the smart navigation mode, which on the screen at the moment indicates a circle with a thick banding. We can actually modify that to be slightly different. Under the tools and the options and navigation tab, here we have the smart default navigation mode on as always, or we can change which mode appears inside the circle. So by default it's set to fly, but we could have examine mode inside the circle, which means fly mode would be outside. Also, we have what we call zones, so I had a thick banding around the outside of this circle. If I change the zone to be fly and examine and click apply, then you'll notice in the background here that that thick banding has gone. So I've now only got 2 possible options. Inside is fly, outside is examine. Or if I want it back, I just change it to that option there, and I've then got the roll functionality as well. So if I don't have that on, then my roll functionality disappears. So I tend to leave it on. Click apply, click OK. If you want to return back to the new interface, you can either do so under the view interface and toggle to the HTML interface, or we have an icon up here. Simply clicking on that will toggle back into the old interface. We go to explore mode and we've got our options there, or we can go back to our project and check that everything has been nicely set up. So we processed 3 scans, we've got 1 cluster registered to 1mm. The last option we have is to create a project point cloud. If I go back to explore mode, I can either do it from the project screen, or I can come in here and do it. If I go to the drop down menu, if I go to the drop down menu and click create, firstly it's telling me I need to save, so I'm just going to click OK to that, and then it comes up with a few new options in here. So the aim of the project point cloud is to create a single spatial database format of all your scans. In doing so, we can eliminate duplicate points along the way, and we can also apply colour balancing where we have several scans meeting. Now what we can do is we can also apply a distance filter to the scans to get rid of unwanted noise. We can also homogenize the point density by a set value, and two new features here are for closing surfaces and full color detail. So closing surfaces will start to make your point cloud look more realistic in the project point cloud view, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that I've created earlier. Also, full color detail is really good if you're working with very low resolution scans on site, but you need high quality imagery back in the office. What you will find, however, is because of the computing power required to close surfaces across multiple scans, it may take slightly longer to create, but the results are far superior to that in previous versions of FARO scene. Also, full color detail does require a large temporary cache folder. The temporary cache folder is not saved afterwards, but scene does require a decent amount of space in order to work. So if we click on that full color detail option there, if you haven't got sufficient hard drive space, then down at the bottom, scene will physically tell you the amount of space required and what space you have available. And when you're ready, you just click OK, and it will go off and it will combine these three scans into a single project point cloud where it's going to close the surfaces and apply full color detail. So what I'm going to do now is open up a couple of project examples for you. So here I've opened up two projects, both the same, but one done in scene 5.5, the other done in scene 6. So what you can see on here is a project point cloud that's been created, and I know that because the create icon is grayed out. And as I start to move here, you can see that the project point cloud drops off, so we start to get transparency and lost points in here. And as soon as I let go, down at the bottom it loads in the relevant number of points. If I then toggle over to scene 6 here and do the same thing, now when I start to move, you can see that there's virtually no drop off whatsoever. So the navigation keeps the quality of the scan on the screen at all time, and the graphics are absolutely superb, which means from a navigational perspective, if you created your project point cloud, you could be in front of a client showing this off in this level of quality in Scene LT, for instance. The next option, which is full color, that was in the project point cloud, means I have to load in another couple of scans to show as an example. So I'll just load those up now. So now what you'll see on my screen is on the left hand side we have scene 5.5, on the right hand side we have scene 6. We have two identical scans. If I go into each scan and look at the properties under the scan area in scene 6, and in the structure over here, go into the properties and the scan area here, we can see that these scans, or this scan, has been done at 1/32 and 4 times quality. So that's a point spacing of around 49mm at 10 meter distance. And you can clearly see the difference on the screen. If on the left hand side I start to zoom in, my point spacing is very sparse. So what I can do here is zoom into the area, and because it's closed the surfaces and it's applied full color, whilst we've scanned at a very low resolution, from a graphical perspective we've got absolutely perfect color. So the results here means that you could get away with scanning at low resolutions but still have the data in a graphical format for creating presentations and movies using the Video Pro app. You have to be careful though, because it depends what you're doing with the data. Obviously on the left hand side we've got a very sparse point cloud, which you can see. It's a 1/32 scan, so it's a 49mm point spacing at 10 meters. If that's sufficient for the kind of work you're doing, then fine, you can still have the graphics. But if it's not, you might need to up the resolution. But it means that now from a graphical perspective, you can do some absolutely wonderful presentations in the later version of Scene 6. So that shows you the graphical benefits of using the project point cloud in Scene 6. I'm just going to close 5.5 now. We'll maximize Scene 6. I'll turn my structure view back to be pinned so it's there permanently. And then what I'm going to do is toggle back to the classic interface over on the left hand side. And just finally over here now, because we're working with scan point clouds, if I right click, we no longer have the ability to load a scan, which is a benefit because if I go to planar view, that will physically load the scan in, so we'll get the green icon here. And what I used to find is that sometimes you'd load a number of scans, you then press save, you'd close the job down, that job might have been on the server. Next time you go into it, because the scans were loaded, Scene has to load all those scans in. Or you start a registration and you've left your scans loaded and it'll be slower. But now if I load a scan into planar view, as soon as I close that scan, it unloads the scan from the RAM of the machine. If I load it again, then it will instantly load in the scan and we can start to work on it. Again, we've got all the tools up here that we've had before. So just to reiterate, if I was doing a target-based registration, I'd pretty much do it in the classic interface. But then I could also go into the new interface if I wanted to do some bits. But all the settings from there also apply in here. So your project point cloud is exactly the same with exactly the same settings. I'm just going to show a couple more small things, and to do so I need to open another project. So we're back in the original tutorial project that we started off with, which was the 3 scans that we'd linked together. And now what I'm going to do is drag in a 4th scan into the classic environment. The first thing you'll notice is it doesn't have a point cloud against it. If I just press save and then OK, it will save that data and filter that data to add it into this particular project. When it's done, if I click OK, I'm going to toggle back now to the new interface and we'll look at the project screen, and here you can see it's processed 3 scans, but this new scan here is unprocessed. If we then go back to the classic interface and say for instance we just wanted to view this scan in a 3D view, if I right click on it and go to view 3D, the first thing the system is going to tell me is that the data is unprocessed and it's in a legacy format. So we first need to process that data before we can actually view it. If I just let this run, and then we'll look at that data in the 3D view. That processing is now finished. So if I click OK, and then we've then got this particular view here, which if I fit the view, we can see this scan 04 in our view. If I then toggle back to the new interface, we can see that we've now got 4 processed scans. We've now got an amber light on our registration because we need to add in that new scan into our registration. So we'd go through the registration process again. Another thing to highlight is when we have actually done a registration, the scan manager is automatically locked when you confirm that that registration is good. So it saves you having to forget to lock your clusters before you then move on to the next cluster to do the registration. The last and final thing I want to show you is a more complex registration report. So to do that, I'm just going to open another project. Here you can see a larger project. It has 16 scans in. I've already done the registration. So if I click on show report from the project home screen, we'll go in and look at this particular report. As we scroll down, we can see that I've got 2 clusters inside and outside, and our color matrix is fairly simple. I can look at the overlap between those 2 and start to toggle and highlight over these to see that I've got a 59.3% overlap between the 2 clusters. Or if I click on full, that will show me the full report in here to show me what overlap I've got and which scans are linked to one another. Now at the moment I've tweaked my settings in here, so I'm just going to go back to my settings, go back to my registration, scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to reset my registration settings and click reset. So once we've done that, we can see we've gone back to the default settings. We then go back into our project, go to our report, go to our full report, and now you can start to see that scan 04 is linked with a green light to scan 05, so it's 4.4 mil. But this scan over here, which is 09, is starting to get colorization against it because it's got a 19.3mm error, and scan 01 over here has got a 9.5mm error. So very quickly in this graphical environment we can start to see what's doing what. Also we can start to see which scans are linked to which by which connections by the numbers here. That about covers the new features of Scene 6. We can toggle backwards and forwards between the new and the classic interface depending on what methods we want to use or how we want to work. But hopefully you can see that the interface is now very streamlined and the new graphical input is superb to give you high quality point cloud representations. Thank you for watching. I hope it's been of use, and please feel free to watch out for forthcoming movies. These will all be published on my YouTube channel, so please feel free to subscribe. I will also send out notifications via my Twitter account, or on LinkedIn, or on the laser scanning forum. If you're struggling with any aspects of scene, I would encourage you to use the knowledge base at FARO.com. All these tutorials are linked to key cases on the knowledge base, plus a lot more tips and tricks. Thank you.